Think about this. Your worst enemy, who has been shooting to kill you for years, is in one of the most vulnerable places a person can be in, and has no idea you're right behind him with your entire arsenal. What do you do? Welcome to The Warrior Bride. I'm Autumn Woods, and today we're covering our fourth wilderness survival tip from the story of David.
Let me go! Let me go! Please, don't hurt me! I'll do anything! Anything!
Get out.
David's integrity was questioned a lot in this second phase of his wilderness training. Even though he had favor with many people, there were key players like Saul and Nabal who tried to give him a bad reputation. Even though he had some close calls, David fought well to maintain his integrity in the face of his haters, and he did this by keeping his focus on what God said and thought about him. David knew that even though God had called him to be the next king of Israel, that didn't mean the timing was right for him to step into the role. Even though David had multiple opportunities to take Saul out as the crazy king stalked him through the wilderness, he never did it. He'd seen enough foul play from King Saul over the last several years that he knew playing dirty didn't pay as much as it cost. Instead, he chose to maintain his integrity and let God install him in his rightful place at the right time. David also understood that this was not truly a battle against flesh and blood. There was demonic activity involved in Saul's actions. Saul propped the door open for sure by disobeying God, but the enemy came flooding in at the invitation. Remember that Jesus, the snake crusher, would come through David's line. So why wouldn't the enemy look for a partner riddled with envy to help eliminate David and stop the prophecy? But even though David had God's promise on his side, even though Saul was hell-bent on killing him, David still loved and honored Saul. He remembered that Saul's vulnerability and humanity crouched behind the bloodthirsty veneer. We see an example of David's integrity in 1 Samuel 24. Saul learned that David and his men were hiding out in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Saul had to pull over into one of the caves to make a pit stop. Little did he know, David and his whole crew were right behind him. Think about this. Your worst enemy, who has been shooting to kill you for years, is in one of the most vulnerable places a person can be in, and has no idea you're right behind him with your entire arsenal. What do you do? David's men were acting a lot like me in the movie theater yelling at the hero. Take him out! Come on! Take him out! Get it over with! God gave you this opportunity. Go, go, go! So, David creeps up behind Saul, raises his sword, and cuts off a corner of Saul's robe while he's doing his business. Now, it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose, went out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, "My lord the king!" And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Indeed, David seeks your harm'? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, 'I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed.' Moreover, my father, see, yes, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off a corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you. But my hand shall not be against you." David's conscience wouldn't even let him embarrass Saul. He immediately confessed what he did and credited the Lord for staying his hand from doing further damage. He calls Saul father and assures him of his loyalty and respect. He takes the battle out of their hands and puts it in God's. He even reminds Saul not to be swayed by what other people say, but to let the Lord, who knows the truth of what's going on, be the judge between them. That's a man of integrity. This lesson is repeated again between them not long before Saul is killed in battle, but before their final confrontation, which goes much faster the second time. David passes a harder test of his integrity with the help of a very wise woman. David was very experienced at facing injustice from people he knew. His major test came when he butted heads with someone who knew nothing about him at all and dragged his name through the mud. After leaving the cave, David and his men stopped by Carmel. Yes, that Carmel where God would later answer Elijah and shame the Baals in a beautiful display of pyrotechnics. They met some shepherds there and protected them and the flocks, never taking anything that wasn't theirs and always conducting themselves well. When the sheep-shearing festival came around, David sent word to Nabal, the owner of the flocks, giving his credentials, explaining how he and his men had helped the shepherds, and asking if they could tag along at the festival. Idiot that he was, Nabal, whose name means fool, scoffed and said, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away, each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from?" Excuse you? David didn't break away from his master rebelliously. He fled for his life, because he had to, after doing nothing but good to Saul. Saul always struggled with the opinions of others. He was ruled by them obviously enough that David had to keep reminding him to stop and be ruled by God instead. Now, David finds himself wounded by the opinion of a fool he doesn't know because his reputation has been called into question. It's one thing to have to put up with this at home from people with skin in the game, but from a stranger? Oh, this is the last straw.
The impudence! The audacity! The unmitigated gall! You've called down the thunder. Now get ready for the boom!
Then David said to his men, "Every man gird on his sword." So every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. There comes a breaking point for even the most righteous people when enough is too much. And you better hope there are people around you who can still see clearly for you when you see red. Fortunately, one of the young men ran and told Abigail, Nabal's wife, the truth, and warned her of David's impending rampage. The Bible tells us in 1 Samuel 25:3 that Abigail was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance, but Nabal was harsh and evil in his doings. So everybody and their mother knew that David was right, Nabal was a foolish scoundrel, and their last line of defense was the wise and rational Abigail. Watch what she does to get our once and future king back on track. After snagging a good portion of the food prepared for the feast, Abigail sends her servants ahead of her to circumvent David's war party and give them the proper welcome they should have had from Nabal. Abigail apologizes for her stupid husband and proceeds to remind David of God's promises over his life. "Please forgive the trespass, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil is not found in you throughout your days. Yet a man has risen to pursue you and seek your life. But the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from a pocket of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. But when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant." Abigail discerns that David's heart has begun to grow weary in doing good. He feels unseen because he's had to spend so much time running and hiding and dealing with people who misunderstand him. He needs encouragement, and he needs it now before he ruins everything. Abigail listens to the Holy Spirit and is blessed with words full of grace, seasoned with salt, that she should know how to answer this war-weary soldier. Notice the language she uses to let David know that she knows his story, his true reputation, his integrity, and his heart. She sympathizes with him being hunted by Saul. She uses the imagery of stones in a sling to describe God taking out David's enemies. And she reminds him that the Lord will make him king and preserve his life because he follows the Lord, doing good and not evil. And as for Nabal, let God deal with him. Sure enough, Saul commits suicide after being wounded in battle, and Nabal dies of a bizarre 10-day shame heart attack brought on by the Lord. David didn't have to lift a finger. The Lord avenged him on his enemies because David was righteous before him. Remember what God thinks about you. Don't let other people, especially people you don't know, cause you to lose your integrity because of your vulnerability. Part of maintaining your integrity is having people around you who will speak words of life over you when you feel like death. The Bible tells us that we are to exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Let their encouragement remind you to focus on doing right by God. Keep your eyes on Him. Behave with integrity, and He'll deal with your enemies. In the next video, we'll wrap up our final wilderness survival tip from David's story. If you're finding value in this content, don't forget to like, sub, share, and hit the bell. New episodes drop Saturdays at 9 a.m. See you soon.